The 450,000-strong General Security and Central Security Forces (CSF) organization is an Egyptian paramilitary force which is responsible for assisting the Egyptian National Police for the security of governmental fixed sites, foreign embassies and AMP missions, riots and AMP crowds control, publicly crowded events, high-risk arrests, disaster response and SWAT operations. They are a vital arm of Egypt's national security apparatus. History. In 1969, a decision was made to create the Central Security Forces from well-trained and equipped police forces on large scale covering the whole country, under the command of the Ministry of Interior, to conduct special police operations in response to operational needs. The creation of those forces followed the paramilitary model, and became close information, training, equipment and operating procedures to the Italian Carabinieri, Indian CRPF and the Russian OMON. The initial batch of recruits were drawn from the police and had to undergo military training under the army. Later on, in 1970, a separate training institute was set up for the CSF and the force started conscripting its recruits. Just like regular army conscripts, the CSF was set up to deal with the growing unrest and public disorder following the Egyptian defeat in the Six-Day War. The CSF was deployed by the Sadat government to tackle large protests by leftist and hardline Nasserist groups in January 1972 in Cairo. The protests were called to protest against Sadat's anti-Soviet and anti-Palestinian foreign policy, lack of action against Israel and right-wing economic measures such as cutting some subsidies and increasing some prices of welfare services like public transport. CSF units had to use force to disperse the rioting crowds in Tahrir Square, which led to the shooting death of 3 protesters. Following the 1973 Arab-Israeli war between Egypt and Israel, then settling the 1973 and AMP 1974 ceasefire agreements, the 1979 Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty was signed and the subsequent Israeli withdrawal from the rest of Sinai Peninsula occurred. The treaty stipulated the Egyptian government refrained from deploying regular Egyptian armed forces units in the eastern part of Sinai that directly border Israel. The Egyptian government then tasked the Central Security Forces to take up the task. The CSF force deployed as effectively a motorized light infantry force without the heavy weapons and equipment. The Egyptian government subsequently came to rely on the CSF to quell any source of instability within the country and to uphold the emergency laws imposed on Egypt since the 1981 assassination of the President of Egypt, Anwar Sadat. The CSF was especially deployed to tackle armed Islamist insurgents. For the 1990s onwards, CSF has become operationally coordinated with the state security, meaning CSF units can be ordered to deploy by state security officers, and has been called the battering ram of state security incidents. In 1986, hundreds of third-category, low-ranking CSF personnel staged a 4-day mutiny in the Egyptian conscription riot. The riot was a reaction to the spread of false rumors among its conscripts that the conscription time will be extended by a year. The insurrection was suppressed by the Egyptian army. They rampaged through the suburb of Giza, burning some hotels and shops in tourist areas. They also burned dozens of cars and buses. Over 20,000 conscripts were dismissed from service with no benefits, and the agitators received correctional punishment after being tried before state security court for arson, violent riots, and insubordination according to penal code. Some reports related that mutiny mutiny to a conspiracy against the Minister of Interior in charge by then due to his policies. After the suppression, the government promised to overhaul the force by raising its entry standards, increasing payment and bettering living conditions in their camps. Organization. The CSF is headed by a Director General, who is a 3-star Police General of the Interior Ministry, and is organized as follows. Main Headquarters, Special Operations Command, Specialized Training Institutes, AWR Operational Regions, Cairo, Alexandria, Giza, Central Anamp, Western Nile Delta, Eastern Nile Delta, Suez Canal Anamp, Sinai, Southern Upper Egypt, and Northern Upper Egypt. Deployment and operating procedures. Similar to other central paramilitary organizations in other countries, CSF deployment is divided into 3 parts: baton, gas, and armed. The basic unit formation of the CSF is a company which is commanded by a police captain or, in some cases, a major, who is a commissioned officer and a graduate of the police college. A senior lieutenant is usually second in command. A CSF company consists of approximately 150 personnel and is composed of 2 baton platoons, a gas platoon, and an armed platoon. Each platoon is also commanded by a lieutenant, with the sergeant is second in command. Approximately 3 to 4 companies make up a CSF battalion, which is commanded by an officer of lieutenant colonel or colonel rank. The baton platoons are equipped with batons and shields. The gas platoon is responsible for the deployment of tear gas, and the armed platoon usually carries assault rifles, usually the AK-47 variants. However, under emergency laws and martial law, the non-armed CSF units can be converted into armed units, and they are additionally equipped with LMGs, recoilless rifles, and sniper rifles for anti-insurgency operations. Also, the 3-part deployment of CSF is not applicable in regions like the North Sinai, where all units are armed at all times. Recruitment. The Central Security Forces personnel consists of 3 categories. Commissioned officers, who enter the service with the rank of lieutenant. They are recruited via national-level exams. For police officers, they receive the commission from the President. Sub-officers, they are equivalent to the non-commissioned officers of the Army, and conscripts recruited entirely from the low-educated recruits, as the more educated and college graduates usually end up in the different branches of the regular military service. Conscripts can later be promoted to the ranks of sub-officers if they continue in the service beyond the compulsory terms and if they get a higher education and sit for the mandatory exams for entering sub-officer ranks. There is high competition among conscripts to extend the service and to become regularized troops. This is because of the high rate of unemployment in Egypt. A conscript enters the force as a private recruit and is promoted to private first class after 2 years of service. At the time of demobilization, release from compulsory 3 years service, many who have passed the 10th grade in school are at the rank of a reefer corporal and can command a section of 10 to 12 conscripts and 1 riot vehicle. Less educated or illiterate conscripts, however, have to retire at the rank of private first class. Those among the corporals who wish can sit for exams to extend the service and receive the rank of deputy sergeant or junior sergeant. Most of the conscripts NCOs are forced to retire at 52 years of age with the rank of sergeant, with no chance of advancement if they do not have a college degree. Less than 2% of conscripts advance into the commissioned officer ranks. Ranks. Officers: Director General, Major General, Brigadier General, Colonel, Lieutenant Colonel, Major, Captain, First Lieutenant, Lieutenant, Sub-Officer, Sergeant, First Class. This rank is held only by the 2 or 3 senior-most NCOs in a battalion. Sergeant, Deputy Sergeant, Junior Sergeant, First NCO rank. corporal. After 3 years of compulsory service, it is usually held by section troop leaders. Conscripts: private first class, junior corporal, squad leader, private recruit, conscript.